Great. Thanks for having me, and thanks for that introduction. I'm Harry Surden. I'm a professor here at the law school. I teach primarily intellectual property topics. And prior to entering law, I was actually a professional software engineer for multiple years. So my research is on technology and law, artificial intelligence and law. I'm also affiliated faculty at the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics, the Codex Center at Stanford University. So this is the outline of my talk. I'm going to be talking about four main topics. What is artificial intelligence generally? What are the main branches of artificial intelligence? Where do we see artificial intelligence in law today? And what are the limits of artificial intelligence in law? So let us begin with a basic question. What is artificial intelligence? Let me say at the outset that artificial intelligence means many different things to many different people and has many different definitions. So I won't attempt to get into all of them here. However, I have found that one useful definition of artificial intelligence is the following. Artificial intelligence is using computers to solve problems or make automated decisions for tasks that normally require intelligence when done by humans. So just for example of activities that are thought to require intelligence when done by humans, we think about playing chess, translating languages, driving cars. And these are all tasks that when we think about it, we kind of associate them with higher order cognitive functionality in humans. Higher order tasks such as reasoning, thinking, vision, etc. So we say something is artificial intelligence if a computer can solve or do some of these tasks that humans tend to do, even if they do it much differently than humans do it. So we think of these types of tasks done by a computer as artificial intelligence. And a crucial point, which I will be emphasizing in this talk, is that the computers typically do it very differently than humans do. When a computer plays chess, they do it very differently than when a human plays chess, even if they might have better results. A computer drives a car using a very different set of techniques than a human drives a car. All right, so let me just throw out one caveat with this definition. Some people might not be happy with that because there are actually AI tasks that computers can do that humans can't do, no matter how hard we try. So a human can't spot credit card fraud in a billion credit card transactions, but a computer can do it. So there's some classes of AI tasks that are not even in the realm of human capability. But that being said, this is a good, I think, useful working definition of AI that would satisfy a lot of people. All right, so before we get into what AI is, let me start out with what AI isn't, because it's really important, I think, to dispel a lot of the mythologies around artificial intelligence, what AI is not. And I want to briefly emphasize the limits of AI, and I'll be circling back to this towards the end of the talk so we can understand some of those limits. So when many lay people think of artificial intelligence, they think of one thing, which is thinking machines. They think of machines that can think at a level that is the same or surpasses humans, or computers that are exhibiting cognitive abilities, human-like cognitive abilities. This view of computers thinking or exhibiting cognitive abilities is sometimes called strong AI, or it's sometimes called artificial general intelligence. We do not have strong AI today. We do not have thinking machines today. We do not have cognitive machines today. This is the view of AI of the movies and in science fiction of fully conversational computers that talk about philosophy or can engage in arbitrary topics. That is not what we have today. Today's most advanced artificial intelligence algorithms cannot think. They cannot replicate the higher order cognitive skills such as abstract reasoning or arbitrary conversation that humans do at even a basic level, even at 3 years old. So why mention this? Unfortunately, from the headlines in the news and on TV and from the pundits on TV, you do get the impression that artificial intelligence is about thinking machines And various companies advertise cognitive computing and, as part of a marketing strategy, which give you a misleading view of the capabilities of AI. But that is decidedly not what we have today. And in my opinion, I spent a lot of time looking at the state of the art of AI research. In my opinion, we are not anywhere near having thinking machines or strong AI machines anywhere soon, in my opinion. I don't think we're close to that. All right, so that's what AI is not. What is AI today? Well, rather, as I shall shortly describe in more detail, AI is mostly pattern-based artificial intelligence. It involves searching large amounts of data for patterns, and then we can use these patterns in really useful ways. Now, I don't want to understate today's pattern-based AI technology because it really is amazing. Some of the things that it can do are fantastic and mind-blowing. We just have to understand accurately what it can do. So today's AIs we will talk about can drive cars, it can translate languages, it can spot tumors in x-rays, it can spot credit card fraud. There's really amazing things that it can do. We just need to understand really what it can actually do as distinct from what the media implies that it can do or what marketing companies suggest that they can do. Okay, so we're going to study in more depth what these AI techniques do and how they work. So there's lots of different ways to think about artificial intelligence out there, how to organize it. I think one useful approach is to look at the various types of techniques that people tend to use when they use artificial intelligence. So I think it's fair to say there are kind of two broad and major artificial intelligence approaches out there, and it's worth spending some time to talk about each. The first approach is the logic and rules-based approach. The second approach is what's known as machine learning. So let's start with the logic and rules-based approach to see what that's about. So the logic and rules-based approach involves what's known as a top-down approach, where you have programmers observe some task or thing in the world and attempt to model that thing using a series of computer rules. So a good example of this in law comes from TurboTax. If you've ever used tax preparation software like TurboTax, basically what you have is you have a company like Intuit, which creates TurboTax, and they have a bunch of programmers who sit down with a bunch of tax lawyers and accountants and say, what is going on in the tax code here, and how can we model that logic in computer rules? How can we accurately model that? So the programmers sit down with the accountants and the lawyers, and they make a bunch of instructions that goes into the software, computer rules that the computer can follow. And they attempt to faithfully represent the logic of the personal income tax code. So for instance, say there's a tax provision that says if your income is above $90,000, then your tax rate is 28%. There's actually something like that in the tax code. Then the computer programmers will sit down and create a computer rule that says if income greater than 91,000, then tax rate equals 28%. And then so what's the benefit of that? Well, when you're doing your taxes and you're entering your income, it can automatically figure out what your tax rate is based upon your income. So it's automating some of this logic. So that's an example of computers reasoning. It's very simple reasoning, but it gets much more complex than that. So again, the tax code offers a really good example of how this becomes very powerful, this rules-based reasoning. So say you take a business trip to Chicago, and that's on your credit card, and there's a provision that says business expenses are tax deductible, then the computer can automatically pull in that business expense, reason that it's a business expense, and then automatically apply that deduction to you, applying the rules. So these chains of reasoning get very, very complicated and powerful, and with a series of rules, you can do pretty amazing things. So this rules-based approach is pretty successful, and this rules-based approach to AI, and it was really the early approach that most AI, artificial intelligence programmers, tried starting in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And they created a series of what are now known as expert systems. And they're so good that they kind of sit in the background. We don't even think about them as AI, right? There are all sorts of business process rules and things that run Amazon and all these other companies. They're so good, we barely notice them anymore. But they're all over the place today, and they can engage in complex chains of reasoning like we talked about here in the TurboTax context. However, they also encountered a lot of limitations. There's a lot of over-promising of their benefits, and around the 1990s, around 2000, people started switching because we kind of reached the limits of this technique. So in the last 20 years or so, an entirely new suite of different techniques called machine learning began to be popular. This is really where AI has started to take off over the last 20 years. This is why you've started to hear about it in the news. You hear it almost every day. We're starting to hear about it in law. So because machine learning is so important, I'm going to spend a lot of time in this topic so we understand what it is and how it applies to law. So essentially, to oversimplify a little bit, machine learning involves looking at a lot of data and noticing useful patterns in that data, and then using those patterns to automate many things. So here are some examples of machine learning that you might be familiar with. We use machine learning to drive self-driving cars. When Amazon says, hey, you like this movie, you might also like that movie. That's an example of machine learning. When Google Translate allows you to translate something from English to Spanish or back again, that is also machine learning. We've also talked about machine learning can be used in credit card fraud, spotting tumors, in X-rays, and many, many other things predicting. So machine learning, it's fair to say, is the dominant paradigm of artificial intelligence. It's really what's running everything out there from Google to Amazon these days. And it's really gets the most attention. So there's a couple of points about machine learning we should think about. First of all, it's not really a technique. It's actually a suite of different techniques that share a bunch of things in common with one another. And I will talk about that shortly. But you might hear words like neural networks or deep learning, or if you're really fancy, logistic regression. And you'll think, what are all of these things? These are machine learning. They're all very different. They're just different tools that share things in common, some characteristics. Okay, so what are the things that they share in common with one another? First of all, they all involve learning. All right, so what is learning? Well, they're designed to improve their performance on some task over time as they analyze more and more data. So let me take a step back and note that, first of all, learning in this context is actually a metaphor. We don't actually mean learning like human learning, the way we learn inside our brains. The computers are not artificially replicating the cognitive brain-based neural systems thought to be involved in learning. Rather, we can think of this as learning in a functional sense, as a functional metaphor. What do I mean by that? Well, we often think that a person is learning when they're getting better at some task over time. Right? If you're learning how to do calculus by practice, you're getting better at calculus over time. It looks like you're learning. By using that analogy, we also say that machine learning techniques are learning, even though they're doing it differently. They are getting better at some task, like spotting tumors or detecting emails over time with more experience. Okay, so that's one point. Learning is a metaphor, but it's core to the machine learning idea. The other core point is that machine learning fundamentally involves pattern detection. So what do I mean by that? The base of many machine learning approaches involves the analysis of large amounts of data, large amounts of previous X-rays that have had tumors in them, and X-rays without tumors, large amounts of email that are spam and not spam, large amounts of cases where people are driving well and driving badly. And then they look through these patterns look through this data to find useful patterns. And I'll show you how they do that. But importantly, these patterns get found and then they get encoded in what's known as a model, computer model. And then this computer model can do all the fancy stuff that we want it to do, like driving a car or detecting spam. So for instance, when Netflix makes a recommendation, hey, you might like this movie, it doesn't actually know what a movie is or what the content of the movie. It is just looking through millions of patterns of its subscribers, and it notes that, hey, people that like movie A have tended to like movie B. You've liked movie A, so we're going to recommend movie B. Doesn't know anything about movie A or movie B other than the fact that it spotted a pattern in this data. So importantly, these patterns are already in the data itself. That association is there. It takes the machine learning to dig deeper into that data and pull out those patterns. So all it's really doing is pulling out patterns that really exist implicitly in data and detecting them. The third characteristic is data. You need lots of data in order to have machine learning. Without lots of data and data to detect patterns, there is no machine learning. So part and parcel with machine learning is the availability of relevant data. So you need millions of Netflix subscribers to look through, or otherwise you can't make predictions, and you need thousands or hundreds of emails to look through, or you can't make predictions about what is spam and is not. The benefit, though, is anywhere where there is data, we can use machine learning. So part of my research is using machine learning in law. So it turns out we have all this legal data out there that nobody's really analyzing because we don't think of it as data. We think of it as law. But we can actually analyze it. I'm happy to talk about that afterwards. And then finally, and perhaps the most interesting aspect of machine learning, is this idea of self-programming. Machine learning algorithms program themselves. So what do I mean? Well, to understand this, it's helpful to contrast machine learning with more traditional programming techniques. So when you look at your traditional programming, whether it's your Microsoft Word or Excel or your Chrome browser, there's a traditional, what's known as a top-down structured approach, where you have a bunch of programmers in a room who know a programming language, and they decide what they want the program to do. They want Microsoft Word, when you hit the print button, to print. And what they'll do is they'll put a series of rules in there. When you hit the print button, send a print command to a printer somewhere, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the typical way software is programmed, by programmers trying to figure out a series of rules that tell the program exactly what to do. So let's imagine you were trying to program a self-driving car by this traditional top-down approach. It would be really hard. Why? Because, you say, okay, whenever I see a stop sign, I should stop. Oh, that's good. Okay, we got a rule there. What happens when the stop sign is covered in snow? Oh man, I forgot a rule about that. It's gonna blast right through the stop sign and cause an accident, right? So driving is so complicated, you can't actually program a good series of rules ahead of time that the computer can figure out. That's where machine learning comes in. Machine learning allows you to program itself not by having a series of rules, but by feeding it a bunch of data and allowing it to look for associations. So imagine instead you're trying to program a self-driving car through machine learning. This is a typical way you'd train the machine learning model. That's what they call it, kind of teaching it good and bad behavior. And what you would do is you'd have a machine learning system installed in the car that's looking at all the aspects of the car. It's looking at where it is, it's looking at its speed, whether the gas pedal or the brake is being pressed, and then you have a good driver, get in the car and drive around, and it's looking at its cameras and at its sensors, and then the car itself starts learning things. It says, oh, look, 100% of the time when I've approached this thing that is red in an octagon, I've stopped. So I should stop. Whatever that thing is, whenever I see one of those, I should stop, right? And it starts inferring all these rules on its own, or I should never cross the center line unless there's something blocking the road, right? So the car starts inferring all these rules on its own, and after millions of miles of driving, you actually get an incredibly complicated rule set that no human could have programmed from the outset. So that's really interesting, and I think is one of the coolest aspects of machine learning is that the program is programming itself. Okay, so let me give you just a familiar example of machine learning that you're probably all familiar with, which is spam filters. So how is it that Google knows when an incoming email from Nigeria is actually spam and is not actually from your friend the prince? So we all know that spam is unsolicited commercial email, right? Email you don't want, you didn't ask for. But you also have these wanted emails from your friends and family members or professors, and you want those to come through. So how does the computer know how to automatically sort your emails so well? Well, it uses machine learning. So there's this one technique, doesn't really matter, but it's called naive Bayes technique. And let's just talk a little bit how it works. So what it's looking for patterns in your email. All right? It's looking for patterns among the spam and patterns among the wanted email. And for instance, most email systems like Google allow you to flag incoming emails as spam. Right? So once you recognize a spam email, you flag it. Well, that immediately tells its machine learning algorithm, aha, here's an example of spam email, start analyzing it for patterns. So after looking at 10 or 20 or 100 of these emails, it's going to notice a pattern. Hey, many more of these spam emails have the phrase earn cash. And it's almost never the case that a wanted email has the phrase earn cash. So we think it's much more statistically likely if we see an email that has the phrase earn cash, it's much more likely to be spam than not. Right? So that's one rule it's learned. It's not a great rule, but it's a pretty good rule. But that's an example of you're training the machine learning algorithm, and it's learned a rule on its own. But the cool thing about machine learning is it gets better over time. So it starts analyzing more and more emails, and it starts looking for different indicia or signals of spam based upon what people have marked as spam or not. Here's another example of it learning or improving at identifying email over time. So the next rule it learns is it notice a lot of emails that come in or spam have the word free in it. And again, very few wanted emails have free. So it starts saying, well, if an email has the word free in it, we're also going to think it's spam. And then finally, something I saw somewhere, the world's largest sender of spam is Belarus, the country of Belarus. So it might learn another rule. Hey, if an email is coming from the country of Belarus, more often than not, it's likely to be spam. So it starts learning more and more of these rules, and it learns the opposite rule. What makes it not likely to be spam? Well, if it has your name in it, right, that makes it a little less likely to be spam because often these email services don't know your name. So it has hundreds or thousands of these rules. All right, so this is an example of machine learning. So just take a step back and see what we've done here. We notice, first of all, it's dealing with data. The data is your email, which has been tagged as either spam or regular. It's detecting patterns in your email, right? So it's learning. It's getting better over time because it's learning more and more rules. And then it's applying these patterns to automate some task that a human might do, right? So you might have a human in the past clicking each email as spam or regular. Now the computer can do it automatically with a high degree of precision. And Google is so good because it harnesses the power of millions of users. So you can, every time somebody tags something as spam, your own email filter learns from it. So you don't have to find it yourself. All right, so this tells us how AI works more generally. And this is a principle that I call intelligent results without intelligence. So remember we talked about AI is doing stuff that when we associate with humans normally requires intelligence, but I also told you that AI doesn't have intelligence. So how does that work? Well, it turns out you can often find what I call proxies or close substitutes in patterns that provide useful models that give you intelligent results. So a good example is spam email. The computer doesn't know what is free or Nigeria or Belarus. It has no idea what those things are. All it knows is that those are useful proxies for spam. But that's also what a human's looking for, right? When a human is looking at spam, they'll notice, hey, this says earn cash. I'm going to hit the spam button, right? So the computer can learn these same rules, even if it doesn't understand what earn or cash is. And that is the basic principle underlying machine learning and most of AI. It turns out there are these useful patterns in a lot of data that computers can harness to produce intelligent results, even though they have no idea what's going on and they don't engage with the meaning. So one other example of this, a really good example of this, comes from statistical machine translation. So when you use Google Translate's really good. So if you ever used old translation services before Google Translate, they were really, really, really bad. And why were they so bad? Well, it turns out in the early days of AI, they started making these translation systems mimicking the way humans did it. So when we translate something, when somebody says, where's the post office? How do I say that in Spanish? You quickly do a lot of mental juggling in your head. You think, okay, what's a post office? It's for delivering mail. What's the analog in Spanish? Okay, oficina de correo. Okay, that, and you give it back very quickly, right? So what's the problem with that? Well, they started building computer systems like that, adding in a bunch of rules, and it just didn't work very well. Why? Because there were metaphors and all these subtleties in language. So the early days of automated translation using rules just didn't work that well. Trying to have the computer engage in the meaning of the word the way humans do just doesn't work. Now we have this much different approach, which is much better. So this is called statistical machine translation. So what Google figured out, so it turns out there are all these groups of documents, millions of documents out there from the UN that had been carefully translated into 6 or more different languages exactly. And then Google said, hey, what happens if we run our machine learning algorithms over this and just look for patterns? And it turns out that really worked. So they suddenly found, 99% of the time when you see post office, you also see oficina de correo. And what's interesting now, when you ask Google Translate to translate it, it doesn't know what a post office is, it doesn't know what a mail, it doesn't matter. It has just found a shortcut or a pattern to give you good results. So that's where we are now. We actually have these amazing translation systems where the computer has no idea what's going on underneath. It is no engagement with the words or the semantics the way a human does. It's doing it a different way, but it's getting good results. It's been producing intelligent results without intelligence. So I think that's really interesting. Computers have found a way to give us intelligent results without intelligence. So that's what machine learning is. Just to sum it up one more time, we have large amounts of data out there, whether it's language data like UN corpuses or email or driving data. We unleash these algorithms to look for patterns, teaching it what's good behavior and bad behavior. That we use large amounts of data, hundreds or thousands or millions of data points, and then the computer programs itself in a series of rules that are too complicated that no human could really do it. Okay, so in sum, those are our two main approaches, the logic and rule-based approach to AI and the machine learning approach. And it's important to note that you don't have to pick one or the other. You can use both. And in fact, self-driving cars use a mix of both. Right? So they use, in a self-driving car, they have some rules there that tell you, certain things. And then there's the large body of it is actually machine learning, but it's a combination. And most systems actually use both. Most systems use some machine learning and some rules. So that's one type of hybrid, merging these two techniques. We also have another type of hybrid, which I think is interesting, are human and AI hybrids, right? So we often think about humans as being replaced by AI, but that's really not what has happened by and large. Rather, humans have tended to have been augmented by AI and improved rather than being replaced. So a good example of this comes from chess, where not many years ago, AI chess systems already beat the world's grandmasters, and there's no human grandmaster that can compete with even the mediocre AI chess systems these days. It's just not even close. But one thing they found is that the best systems are largely these hybrid systems where you have human grandmasters paired with an AI computer can outperform a lot or most, even the best AI systems. And that's often what you see where the AI is augmenting human decision making rather than replacing it. So I think that's really interesting. All right, so now that we know what AI is and how it works, let's talk about AI in law today. Where do we see it? We do see a bunch of logic-based AI in law today. These occur in what are known as compliance engines. So if these big companies, and you have so many laws out there, and the companies are trying not to violate the law, what do? Well, they build these internal models of the law, and then they kind of run their activities through the system and say, hey, are there any red flags here? Are we maybe bribing somebody? Does this look like a bribe or a payment in violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or is this okay? Or is this going to violate some threshold? Expert systems. So you'll see this a lot. There's a lot of systems now where underserved communities can go into legal aid and use a little computer system and say, okay, I've got a problem. What's your problem? Landlord tenant. Okay, have you tried this? Have you tried this? So the computer system is telling the person what to do, and they can engage in a lot of self-help by following these expert systems in law. And there's a bunch of these out there. Attorney workflow systems. If you go to modern law firms, they often have these systems where they have the whole process, say for a motion, embedded in the system. Like you have to do this first and file it on this date, and then make sure this gets done by that time. That's examples of rule-based AI. Automated document assembly. Again, if you go to a large law firm, they don't write up contracts from scratch, right? They have this body of contracts where it might have choice of law clause and a merger provision, and they kind of piece and mix them together. Again, that is rules-based AI. However, what I think is more interesting is machine learning in law, which is just starting at its very basic stages. So you see this in litigation now. So it's almost, it's very common these days to have discovery, have computers looking through millions of documents that used to be the lot of poor young associates. Right? So you used to have poor young recent law grads sitting in a basement somewhere looking through millions of emails. Now luckily they just look through thousands of emails instead of millions of emails. Why? Because they have these computer systems which filter out these emails on the front end using machine learning to try and predict what is or is not relevant. So this is sometimes called predictive coding. You'll see this out there. One controversial and interesting place you see this now is in criminal sentencing and parole and bail decisions. So judges in some states get these reports when they're trying to make a sentencing or parole decision. The report might give a score from 1 to 10 about the defendant's risk of reoffending. And then where does that risk of reoffending come from? Well, there's a machine learning program under there that some company has built that predicts the outcome. So a lot of judges are using this. I'm involved in advising some companies doing natural language processing of documents, trying to analyze contracts or other provisions, trying to figure out structure in there. Predictive analytics, this is super interesting. Can you use machine learning to predict whether your client is going to win? What's the probability? So this is something I'm actively involved in, right? This is a lot of what attorneys do, but we do it informally. I give you a 45% chance. Well, what's that based upon? Kind of my intuition, right? Well, you can actually put data behind this and help improve your intuitions. We also see this in legal research, right? So machine learning is starting to bubble up to help bring you what machine learning thinks is the most relevant case to a fact pattern. So these are all interesting. I'm happy to talk about these afterwards. But I think the most important thing to talk about for your benefit is the limits on AI, because I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can think about it in terms of your legal career. All right, so it's really important to understand the limits of artificial intelligence. As we noted, advanced abstract reasoning and cognitive intelligence is way beyond the province of modern AI. They can't discuss arbitrary philosophy or create new novel legal arguments or anything like that. Second, they typically require patterns or rules. That's something I've expressed. So one mistake I think that pundits make in the news is they do the following. They say, hey, look, AI has been used to create computer systems that can beat the best chess players and the best Go players. We traditionally thought that was an impossible task. Now that we've conquered this impossible task, in 10 years, we shall have super intelligent AI machines that are going to take all our jobs. That is a problem because it's not a sophisticated analysis understanding the way AI works and extrapolating out from current AI techniques. So if you look at the major problem is that those type of games, chess and Go, have particular characteristics that are just very well suited to AI. Number one, they're very rules-based, right? Chess has a series of rules. Go has a series of rules. By contrast, out there in the world, philosophy or law only has very vague or fuzzy rules. A lot of the abstract ideas we deal with aren't extremely rules-based. Number two, they have very clear patterns, right? In chess and in Go, there are definitely clear patterns. In there, again, there are certainly some patterns in abstract thinking, but they're very vague and high level in human thinking. And then finally, what makes chess or Go hard is computational complexity, right? The number of moves on our chessboard are 10 to the 120th, which is more than the number of atoms in the universe, right? That's what's made it so hard, is that human brain processing can't compute that many things. Well, what are computers good at? Computing many things. That's what they're really good at. So that's what has made chess programs much better than people. Even the world's grandmasters can see 8 steps ahead maximum. The best computer programs can now, based upon speed and hardware, can see 30, 40 steps in the future, way beyond what humans can do. So you can't extrapolate out from what computers have done today and gone to a different set of problems, right? The problems they're talking about, abstract thinking, things like that, which is an entirely different set of problems, different characteristics, and it will require inventions that haven't happened yet, right? So that brings us to the realm of sci-fi. You could always speculate that maybe some invention that hasn't happened yet, cognitive computing, will happen, and that's certainly possible, but you don't want to base your policy on that, right? It's much better to look at existing technology and extrapolate out from existing technology than speculating, hey, maybe in 5 years, this thing that nobody's ever managed to achieve might get invented. Maybe that will happen, but maybe not. All right, so what about your legal careers? I think we can translate this to some useful lessons for you guys for the future. We can actually extrapolate out based upon what computers can do to how you guys should be positioning yourselves. So traditionally, lawyers have generally done 2 types of tasks. They've done sort of mechanical tasks, and they've done non-mechanical tasks that require abstract reasoning. So an example of a mechanical task is this kind of email discovery. In the past, you used to have these associates looking at an email, and it said, looking at the date, and said, oh, this email happened after the incident in interest, so it's not relevant. Next, this email happened after the incident of interest. Next, right? So there's a pattern in there. We were able to use AI to automate those patterns away. So the lesson is any task, so lawyers have traditionally been able to charge for both mechanical and non-mechanical tasks. Those days of being able to charge for mechanical tasks are going away, right? So anything that we can automate anything in law for where there's a pattern and a structure is probably going to be automatable. However, luckily for us, I don't think that's the vast majority of law. The vast majority of law does involve abstract cognitive reasoning for which there isn't discernible patterns involving advising clients. This, using current technology, is not automatable, nor is it automatable anywhere in the future. So the lesson to you, I think, is not to make sure you don't position yourself in an area of law or a skill set that involves some sort of repetitive task, because those are likely to be automated away, and in 10 years, you're going to be stuck with the obsolete skill set. Rather, put yourself in a position where you're engaged in abstract reasoning, problem solving, things that are hard for computers to do, and those are unlikely to be automated away anytime soon, in my opinion. All right, so I will stop there, and I will take questions from anyone in the audience.